The term out of place artifacts has been in vogue for a while now. And when we talk about ancient Egypt, artifacts are collected in the thousands, if not the millions, and a number of them are out of place. In other words, they are unique in many ways. Ibrahim introduced me to a number of stoneware pieces. This is about almost 8, 9 years ago. And I didn't realize that they not only are available to see in the museums, but they're collected by people. And I remember when we had Adam Young on the program, he was discussing these, and I didn't pay attention until Bim Kirkwick brought him up and was just talking about him. And we've had Adam on. Adam's coming back to us. We had Adam on quite regularly about 7, 8 years ago. And we have him back with us to talk about these artifacts. And, Adam's like, hey, look what I got. I have these for many years. And I wasn't paying attention. And I'm paying attention now. And Adam is a research investigator. He's done not only some excellent work in describing these out of place artifacts, but he's shown up and was part of the Cosmic Summit, which just happened in North Carolina, and was presenting these. So, hey, Adam, great. Welcome back, buddy. And thanks for joining me.
Well, thanks, Cliff. Yeah, it's been too long.
Yeah. It's funny because, I remember you telling me about these items that you had, and I thought at the time maybe my head wasn't screwed on right, but they were very, very unique because of the precision. But what was the attraction for you when you began collecting these? I don't know, it's been at least 10 years now, right?
Yeah, I think I probably wasn't as knowledgeable back then. So I was describing what I thought was anomalous, and I think I had only conducted a few, somewhat rudimentary or initial scans and then analysis afterwards, and just didn't really know how big it would be or how prevalent this sort of data is. And since then, I've created a pretty big team of researchers from mostly North America and Europe. And we've been conducting this in concert with institutions like museums and universities. And so it's really grown a lot, and we have a lot more data. We have a bigger story to tell, I think, at this point. And, it's taken a while, but yeah, it's difficult because of the thousands of years of sort of like dogmatic archaeological accepted mainstream ideas that we had to, overcome.
Do you now feel that these items are much more important than just being vases and plates and bowls for everyday household use, or do they have more of a place as machines or devices that are part of machines or sophisticated applications of some kind?
That's a great question. I really don't know. I think it could go either way. I have a strong sense that they were made using advanced knowledge
Mm.
of machining and techniques to achieve the levels of precision and very low tolerances that we're seeing. But what end? Well, if this was just easy and very possible, it's conceivable that the rudimentary, like normal objects would be made. We don't really make anything today purely by hand that's designed to be purposeful, right? So like most art is made by hand today, but not things that you find in your kitchen and bathroom. That's generally made using machines just because it's easier and it's faster. So I don't think there's anything wrong with saying these were mundane objects. They were vases and stoneware, plateware, things like that. That could potentially be true. Or they could be components in something different, something with higher function. It's been speculated by Kriston and others that potentially there's resonant properties in some of these things that they could have functioned in harmony in some sort of a monumental building like a pyramid or other places. I just don't know enough to say whether or not I have an opinion on that. I'm more concerned with kind of when these were made and by who, and less so to what end. It would be great to have answers to all of these questions. So maybe one day we'll have a little bit more than we do now.
Yeah, exactly. Did Petrie collect these items? I know he's got like cores. I was at the Petrie Museum in
Yeah.
London a couple of years ago, and the cores are very obviously some form of machinery. But does he collect? I don't think I saw any of the bowls or vases that are very popular right now.
Petrie was all over. He was in Giza, he was in Abydos, he was up and down the Nile. and he collected them. He brought back hundreds of thousands of objects from Egypt. So
Hmm.
these were a big part of it. He was fascinated by these. He thought these were originally he thought they were made by like he said he used the term aliens, but he was talking about aliens that were not native to the region. So he thought there were some sort of invaders or Libyans or something like that that had come into the area and potentially founded Egypt because he had excavated some of these in very old sites and said, "Oh, these people must have been who built all this stuff," and because they're so much more advanced than
Hmm.
any of the other pottery or lithics or whatever is surviving in these burials. It's not much. Pottery would survive. Generally, wood wouldn't, but sometimes it would if it was preserved in the desert and it was, especially Middle and Late Kingdom, we do see wood objects. But these were just of a much different nature, and they seem to be replicated in other mediums potentially later on, such as the pottery. You see some pottery that seems to be emulating a lot of the stone. And so yeah, he was obsessed with a lot of this. He was in Thebes, he was in the Fayum, Naqada, of course, Abydos, Luxor, Amarna, a lot of different places, and he found these in relatively small quantities in specific geographical locations. A French archaeologist later on, probably up to 30 years after Petrie first started finding these and recording them, found many thousands of these at Saqqara. So it wasn't just Petrie, it was others, but Petrie started really documenting this, and he's called the father of Egyptology for a reason, right? He
Yeah.
introduced really at the end of the day, he just really cared more than anyone else, and he didn't think this was a treasure hunting game. He thought this stuff had to be protected in some way, and so he did take a lot of stuff back, but and he gave it to his benefactors and museums and sold some stuff, yes. But what he didn't do was destroy it. He never used dynamite. He was very careful. And he was concerned about preservation because he recognized the importance of a lot of this material.
What is the unique factors in these vases and I'm just going to call them stoneware because that's what
Yeah.
I consider them as. I have 2 years ago I got a part of a cup that was cut right in half. I got it from a archaeologist from that Muhammad introduced to me, and the level of precision is machined. It's some form of machinery. But describe the uniqueness of these vases, bowls, whatever, that makes them really out of place for the time period and why they're such a unique item.
I think it's important to recognize that not everything we dig up and look at is super impressive, right? And not every stone vase is very precise. A lot of them are. A lot of the ones that we're interested in analyzing end up being that way because we can see that they are. Before we can see that they look symmetrical, right? They look
Mhm.
very geometric. They look like they were made by hands or something that wasn't making the other stuff. And so, we have a bit of a selection bias. We're not, there's millions of objects that were taken out of Egypt. We don't have the time or the energy or the interest to analyze everything. But when we're talking about like the different categories, perhaps generally the ones that are the most precise are the oldest. So that's something that it really needs to be clarified. Many of them are labeled pre-dynastic. They were found in burials that predate any of the dynasties by up to thousands of years, up to 1 to 2,000 years at least. And I've heard other excavations have potentially uncovered things that were even older, but there's a gap in the archaeological record also. But what we're seeing is complex spherical geometry in these vessels, call them vases if you like, that is not of a simple cylindrical nature. Cylinders are not that difficult to get around. We can use very rudimentary grinding techniques, given enough time, will impart roundness. They have, potentially low friction as well. So you can carve a really, really round cylinder with primitive techniques, but these are complex spherical geometry. Sometimes there's hyperbolic features, sometimes they're elliptical, which is crazy. We can talk about that in a bit too, like oval in nature. So there's effectively two radii or foci. We don't know how they were made, but I haven't seen anyone make them really today, even with modern machinery. We think it's possible. Sure, a lot of people think it's possible, but it's expensive and time consuming. And so, like you were asking me earlier, some of these used to be cheap, hundreds of dollars or a few $1,000s. That wouldn't really make sense if it was very difficult and laborious to create. Not to mention the all the different geometric features, like the interiors that are contoured to the outside to some extent, where they're not, it's not just a cordial or a cylindrical dig out, it's really contoured. And that's extremely difficult to do in any hard igneous rock, right? So we're talking about granite, diorite, sometimes porphyry, and serpentine and others like that. What we're not really talking about, or at least not enough, is the alabaster. So that there's a whole lot of alabaster, and alabaster was an industry in Egypt all the way through the New Kingdom. And so we know the dynastic Egyptians did make a lot of alabaster. The ones that they appear to have made, we don't really see the level of, quite the level of precision that we see in the older ones. But we do see some alabaster that appear to be old, that appear to be as precise as the igneous rock ones too. So it's a long period of time. There are thousands of years that evolved, that went on there. There was different groups doing different things. But I think it's something that really was never, it wasn't studied enough. It was first came to vogue in the Victorian era, and archaeologists use something called form-based dating to try to date some of these things. So they were found in tombs, and if we think we know the tomb is 2,500 years old or sixth dynasty, whatever, then they would ascribe that age to the object,
Hmm.
irrespective of the fact that heirlooms are handed down, right? So that was always ignored. But then they would say, well, this form matched another form. We're confident on that date. So then everything that looks like that, or most things that look like that, are now that age, just because they look similar.
Right.
And what that's led to is just, I think, inaccuracy in dating of all sorts of objects, not just these vases. It's extremely imprecise. What is what I would the way I would describe it. Yes, we can carbon date bodies. You can't carbon date stone, of course. So form-based dating doesn't make sense, and it relies on assumptions like people are going to make the same thing for a period of time. We see certain objects that are classified. They look very, very similar, and the dates can range by 2,000 years, which I think is just really illogical to think that a group of people would be making the same thing for 2,000 years, or that a group of people would even exist for 2,000 years, right? So it's a huge subject.
Yeah.
We can talk about it all night if you like.
Can you show us a couple of pieces that you find are great examples of perhaps your own collection?
Yeah, yes. So let's see.
My curiosity is that you've named a number of very hard rocks, stone, and the initial idea was that they were placed in on lathes and spun at great revolution and then cut. But the tools to cut would have to be very, very sharp. And also, there's the issue with the handle or the grip. I don't know how else you describe it. If they stop and then start again and then carve the handle, it's like, how the hell did they explain that? It's a very unique vessel.
Yeah, so if you're talking about lug handles, you're talking about these things, right? Or how would that have happened? Right? I don't know. It's difficult to really even speculate, but most likely there was a toroidal band that was left around the body of the
Right.
vase, and then material was removed to reveal the handles. And we don't see what we do see is very high levels of precision in the middle of where the handles are, which would not correspond to cutting the whole thing on the lathe. So there must have been multiple processes involved. I think that's
Yeah.
probably not controversial. But we do see, we see plenty that don't. So here's a few that don't. This is from the Petrie Museum. Here's another one from the Petrie Museum that we analyzed. This one was remarkably precise, but interestingly enough, the interior was much more precise than the exterior.
Are you showing something? Because I can't see it.
Oh, yes. One second.
There we
Are you
go.
able to see this?
Now I can see the screen. So now there you go. Perfect.
Yeah. This is an example of a vessel with lug handles and then vessels without on the left. This is from the Petrie Museum where the interior is more precise than the exterior. So it's not always the other way around. Most of the time we've seen exteriors are much more round than the interior because the interior is very difficult to cut to begin with, let alone to finish to whatever level of accuracy or precision that was desired. And I think back to your other point, we don't see any that are exactly the same, but from these four, you can see that this would be something that would lend itself to form-based dating. So these look very similar. It's a very similar design. They're not exactly the same, and these are all different materials. That's real red granite to basalt, and then limestone on the right.
What's
So
funny about these, Adam, is that I don't have never seen these this shape. They're all kind of similar design, but they're gorgeous. They're beautiful. And to say these are just random, what are the Egyptological community saying about these? Are they paying attention to the craftsmanship, or is it just the general assumption that this is just the way it is with the old kingdom, middle kingdom, new kingdom. How are they explaining this?
Well, in terms of how, first of all, in terms of dating, there's consensus with respect to we think we know who made these things. We think they think they know where most of the pharaohs and kings were eventually buried, right? Not inside pyramids, namely, but in other areas. There's burials around Abydos, there's burials near Giza, there's burials in the around Luxor and Valley of the Kings and Queens. But in terms of like who made things, it's a lot less clear. You may find the name of someone on a building or on a wall, and that's typically who is attributed to having made that thing. But what if you don't, right? What if there's no name on something? That still needs a name. It still needs to be attributed to someone. And so that's where I think the theory came in. And that's where the practice of that we still sort of see today. It started in the 1800s and it's persisted. And that's archaeologists are very reluctant to question those ideas. Like, did pharaohs build the very impressive pyramids? Did dynastic Egyptians make this stuff? Some of this stuff. They were very impressive people.
Yeah.
They were astronomers, physicists, like spectacular doctors and musicians, everything. They were extremely impressive. However, I think with some of these objects, we don't see any evidence that they had the tools or the technology to make them. I think some of these vessels are an example of that, but we have something also very interesting in that a lot of these vessels, a lot of the very precise ones, were actually not found in the possession of dynastic Egyptians. They were found in a precursor civilization that was much less advanced,
Yeah.
and that's namely Naqada. And so that's really probably my favorite part of the story because this culture was living in mud huts. They tried and traded a lot. So who knows where they got them from. But and they were found buried with these. And that's what Petrie was excavating and was very focused on for much of his life. But this culture didn't have spindles, they didn't have the wheel as far as we know, and they did have pottery. Coincidentally, their pottery was handmade. It was made by coiling or pinching the clay. What they didn't have a pottery wheel. These objects, these stone vessels appear to have been made on something that's rotating. You can see rotational marks in a lot of these. You see grooves, you see the evidence of hand tools, or imagine something spinning on a lathe and you holding an object to it. You see that pressure equally rotated around the object. That had to have been done by revolving equipment of some sort, right?
Yeah.
Indicating the wheel or the lathe was used. That doesn't seem to have been in Egypt until 3000 years old, 3000 BC, and it certainly wasn't in Akkad. They didn't use it for anything else, so they must not have had it. Yet
What's
these
the
were made using it.
Naqada time frame that these are found? Is that like 4000 BC?
I think it's roughly 3 to 5. A lot of these are found in that sort of fourth. They'll say Naqada 2 a lot of times, which is like 3500 to 4 or up to 4500 BC. So sometimes I think it's you can say 1 to 2,000 years before dynastic Egypt.
1 or 2,000 years. So are you speculating that this is from a culture that is Ice Age, like perhaps 9,500 or earlier, prior to the hypothesis of the catastrophe, the Younger Dryas hypothesis?
Yeah, again, it's really hard to speculate. This is evidence of the turning marks I was referring to.
Oh,
So
excellent. Yeah.
yeah, so this the thing was being rotated, right? On a fixed axis spindle,
Mhm.
something that was rotating in a circular motion. That's why you see those lines like that. You don't get that.
Very precise cuts too there.
You wouldn't get that if you were holding it and scraping it, right? You wouldn't see that.
Right.
So they're made using rotating tools of some sort. The timeline that you're asking about is tricky. So let's just use 5000 BC as the start of Naqada, just for argument's sake. We don't see much in the fossil record or in the archaeological record, excuse me, from 5 to 10,000 BC. There's very
Mhm.
little. I don't know why. Is that because Naqada found them all? Right? I don't know. Was there something else at play? Did Naqada did they trade for these things? They
Mhm.
were world travelers. They were all up and down Africa. They were in the Middle East all the way up to Syria. Did they trade for these and bring them back somewhere else? I don't know. But a lot of these were, you know, a lot of these were found during that time period and not much before. I've heard stories that some of these have been found before. I haven't really seen documentation of it yet, so that's I'm very interested to see that. So I don't know when they were made, but Naqada is really the only civilization that predates dynastic Egypt that we really know much about at all. There's Badarians, there's a number of other cultures that existed back then. None of them were sophisticated. They weren't even close to dynastic Egypt, from what we believe is true. They were much simpler, more rudimentary people. So who made
Okay.
these is a big question. and when? How, of course, is an obvious question, but who and when, we have literally no idea. I don't think anyone knows.
Yeah. The latest genre of thought on ancient cultures has the idea of reuse of temples, reuse of buildings, reuse of artifacts. In fact, we've had Kara Cooney, Dr. Cooney from UCLA come on a few times, who has had written a whole book called Reusing for the Dead, where they were using their tomb goods and the artifacts and items for the dead over and over and over again over hundreds of years, which was a shock. But we now are thinking that these temples like Karnak, Luxor, and Dendera were used and perhaps were pre-Diluvian. And so if that's the case, that's the evidence of an earlier race of people who could be behind these stoneware, but there's no way to know because there's no writing. But I think the only thing you can really track is the sophistication of these temples. And these megalithic temples are very, very difficult to put together. And
Mhm.
if they are being used continually over thousands of years, maybe they do have a connection to these stoneware items that you are presenting.
We can't prove that what you said is not true, right?
Yeah,
We can't prove that it was not made by an earlier civilization because there's no evidence that anyone made it that we have been told
yeah.
effectively. I see, yeah, I see strong overlaps in the geometry and symmetry, the medium, the types of stone that was used in these objects and in larger buildings like the pyramids. Like there's I suspect it was the same group of people. And I don't think that the dynastic Egyptians had the technology or the tools or the know-how to build either one of those personally. So I do think it was someone else, but we don't, there's no evidence to say it's older than, it's pre-Diluvian, it's older than
Yeah.
12,000 years old. There's no evidence for that, but there's no evidence. I don't think there's any evidence that suggests Naqada or early dynastic Egyptians made these either.
Yeah. Let's talk little bit about this new analysis. You've taken simply conceiving of a sophisticated society into the lab and doing some very, very, and have continued to do some very, very sophisticated analysis. Talk a little bit about what you have been able to find with the use of present day technology.
So here's a image of us at the Petrie Museum. This is Carly Polka. He's another member of the Artifact Foundation. He has his own independent podcast as well. It's called the Ancient Technology Podcast. He's on YouTube. So he's a member of the Artifact Foundation with me, and we've gone into a number of museums in the last couple of years. This is the Petrie Museum in London. It was in 2024. And so we're using a laser scanner. This just accumulates data points around the object and puts it into a point cloud data set, which is like a Cartesian XYZ coordinate system that you can then bring with you. It's portable, right? So you can now do the analysis anywhere you want.
Oh, wow.
And so, this is kind of what it looks like on the screen, where we're just
How
capturing these
did you
data
get
points. So,
permission to pull stoneware from Petrie's museum?
so they were the most friendly.
Really?
Apparently established a relationship with them a while ago, and we've also been to the Turin Museum in Italy,
Wow.
the Brooklyn Museum here in New York, and then the MFA in Boston. The MFA actually took the longest. I took me a couple of years to ingratiate ourselves with them, but we're not seeking to challenge the narrative or to challenge anything. We're looking to analyze first and foremost. There's a preservation aspect here. If we get something like this digitized, it can then be shared and stored by the museum.
Oh, right. So you share your research and your analysis.
Certainly the scans, the research and the analysis, I think traditional institutions are probably less interested in. It's curious to them, but I don't think they're thinking of the implications yet, just yet.
Are they having
Uh,
does anyone else scan their stoneware in
no,
the same manner that you are?
since us, others have been there and used other equipment, but in all the places we've been, we were the first. We were the first to even ask them
Wow.
generally, or we were the first that they allowed. They generally don't allow this level
That's
of
fantastic,
but
Adam.
it's not it's non-destructive, right? We're not touching the objects aside from placing them on a pedestal or a rotating table like that inspection table. We're
Yeah.
not touching them, so we're not taking prints. We're not using like wax or rubber or anything else. No chemicals. It's just light. Effectively, it's laser light These are or photogrammetry, capturing photographs and stitching them together. The other machines, like CMM machines, we don't have anything that's portable. That would be more accurate. That does involve touching. So it's really a question of what are the policies. Petrie consider this his teaching material. So this was
Oh,
like probably the bottom 5% of the objects he brought back, and he eventually donated and sold these to this museum here at this college in London,
right.
which maintains it, and they allow researchers here. While we were here, there was another table next to us with someone doing something else, not the same thing, but they were also doing research.
How
So
extensive is his collection, Adam? Does he have like a whole room of vases and plates and bowls and things, or is it
yeah,
limited?
there's 80 or 90,000 objects in this museum. I would say, there was less than 30 or 40 of these types of hard rock vessels that we were interested in. He
Okay.
also has fragments and shards. But again, most of the best stuff that he found, generally, when I say the best, like the most interesting from a variety of perspectives, was given or sold, given to his benefactors and the people that he worked with in concert with. His family retained a lot, and then other stuff was sold off. So
Hmm.
what we found here is, let me know if you can see this file. Are you able to see this?
Yeah.
So this is just a comparison of the different objects we saw and we analyzed. And so across the bottom is the circularity, median circularity, which is the deviance from a perfect circle, right? If you we take a scan image of an object, we then cut it into vertical slices, maybe thousands of slices, and then each
Hmm.
slice we overlay a circle on, and we measure the distance from each point to a circle. So if it was perfect, there'd be no deviation. Every point would be on that circle. We just layered on, right? Photoshopped on effectively. If the less perfect it is, the more either damage, wear, and tear, or just the less rounded it is, the more deviation, the more these points are going to vary from true circularity or perfection. And so this is the object I was showing you where the inside
Right.
was more on the all the way on the left, UC41053, where the inside was more precise than the exterior. And then it kind of ranges. So these are not the best results we've seen. We've seen other objects, particularly in private collections, that are more precise than this, far more precise in some cases. But even the ones here that seem to be less precise are still very interesting and are probably, I believe, not possible to do strictly by hand. You would need some sort of machining apparatus.
So
Could be a
they're
hand-guided
considered
machine.
machined. They're considered machined, basically.
By me, I would consider these machined. By archaeologists, no, they're not. Archaeologists have a mainstream set of instructions that involve, I'll go through it real quick. So you get like a stone boulder. If you find the target stone, you carve it into like some sort of a round spherical object using dolorite pounders, which is about a 6 on the Mohs scale, so it's quite hard. It's not quite as hard as granite. And copper chisels, copper has to make its way in there somewhere, right? You pierce the top of it using a tube drill, also made of copper. Now, and it might have, it's going to have some sort of a removal material that could potentially be like corundum or quartz, which is all over Egypt to hollow that out. You then fix it somewhere. So the traditional story goes, you fix this into a hole or on a work table. You then use flint and you attach the flint to a forked stick and you turn it into basically like a forked drill that you then rotate around by hand. So everything in the traditional story is revolves around hand tools. So here's another
So I don't
set of
understand.
pictures.
Even in the face of advanced engineering and machining, they still go by this rudimentary hand cut stone bowl or stone
And
vase.
and here's why. These are pictures from Tombs of the Nobles on the right-hand side, which isn't hieroglyphs, by the way. This is painted on basically what is effectively plaster walls. So this was New Kingdom, and they're talking about making, you can see on the lower right rectangle here, they're talking about making a big jar. So this is a description of life back in their day. They're also making wooden furniture and other things. And archaeologists have extrapolated this to explain how everything was made based on a couple of accounts, third-party accounts, potentially many thousands of years later. And I think these stories are probably meant to relate to both pottery and limestone or calcite.
Really?
So yeah, so limestone vessels, calcite, alabaster, those are very soft. And you can cut these things with bronze, copper. You don't even really need an abrasive. The Romans were doing that too without an abrasive. And this whole concept of the fork drill, I believe this was used in the Egyptian alabaster industry. The problem is it's not capable of precision at all. And
Yeah.
when we analyze these vessels, they're off by orders of magnitude, 1 to 2 orders of magnitude, which is between 10 and 100 times less precise. And that's where the traditional narrative comes from.
I think there's a book in there somewhere, Adam. There's a book with some the alternative view with engineering analysis and some of the equipment and the analytical tools that you've used to wake people up because this is crazy to keep thinking that they're using hand tools to create these bowls, vases, and plates. It's just crazy.
Yeah. So I want to share something with you also. We haven't really been talking about it yet because we haven't finished our analysis. Let me just pull it up. So I'm about to share my screen here. This is a vessel. This is a vessel from the Terre Museum in Italy. And so the Terre Museum is like the second largest collection of Egyptian objects outside of the Cairo Museum in the world. It was really like the first Egyptian museum outside of Cairo, and now
How
it's
did
got the
the
second largest collection.
when did the Italians start collecting to such volume?
It was late 1800s. It was private collection then that was then gifted or sold to the museum.
Oh, so that was during the
Probably.
nomad period of Egypt when there's nobody out there and they can just kind of come in and clean
Oh yeah,
house.
The Italians were prolific in archaeology as well as the French, Austrians, Germans, and then of course the Brits.
Okay.
So this is I don't remember the actual dating, but most of these are either early dynastic Egypt or before pre-dynastic, including Naqada. So when we were analyzing this, we at first we thought, well, I love it when there are these feldspar inclusions. It's either when you see these big things, these crystals are either quartz or feldspar typically, and they're usually a lot harder than the ground mass, which is the blackish material.
Hmm.
Usually the crystals are harder. Quartz is sort of like a 7 on the Mohs scale. I think feldspar is close. So it would have been really hard to cut and make this. However, it can be done using techniques that have low friction, like grinding. So I think we have an idea that sure, this was possible. Obviously, somebody made it using something. But when we looked at it, we realized it's not perfectly round. We were looking at it from the top down, and it just didn't seem to be round. But what it did look like was an oval. We said, okay, this looks like an oval. And so how do we put this together recently on the right? So this is a silhouette. So this is the object. The exterior walls are in red and blue. And the reason it's two different colors is because we rotated the object 90 degrees. So the red is a 90-degree rotated view of the blue. And you can see that it is an oval. There's a better way of showing this. Well, we need to show three-dimensionally. This is an oval. So it's ellipsoid. There's two axes in here. So if
Right.
you think these were made on a lathe, I've never seen a lathe that has two axes. The lathe would be rotating in an oval fashion at some point, right? Or the grinding apparatus, whatever you're using to cut the stone, would have to be rotating around it in an oval fashion.
Yeah.
I don't need to use the word perfect. It's not a perfect, nothing is perfect. There's no perfect circles, there's no perfect stoneware, there's no perfect ovals. But this is pretty oval in
I think
geometry.
the other thing that makes this a remarkable vase is these unusual grip or hand
Yeah.
holding protrusions at the
Yep.
top. It's like, wow, that is so cool. It's almost modern thought, It's not, I mean, wow, it's pretty
It's
cool.
beautiful. This was like 18 inches. This was huge too. It was large.
Oh, it's big.
Yeah, yeah. The lug handles have always been a point of interest. They're potentially functional, like to pick something up easier, yes, but
Yeah.
only some of these have them. A relative minority of objects have lug handles.
I mean,
They
this
weren't.
goes beyond a lathe spinning. This is something entirely unique. Is there any way through microscope or fine imaging that you can see cut lines, any kind of chipping away or carving on that vase?
This one in particular, I don't recall what we were looking at. There is though. There's evidence of hand tooling on a lot of these. So in some of them, okay, here's an image of the OG vessel. I'll share it in the microphone, the camera real quick too. So this is the OG base. It's red granite, potentially Aswanian granite. You can see it's very nice. It's
Yeah,
not perfect, nothing's perfect, but this is one of the highest precision objects we've ever measured. Now, here's an up close picture of it.
right.
Here we go. So this is a lug handle. Now you can see the sides. There seems to be some wear and tear or tooling or something, right?
Yeah.
There's evidence that something else was touching this. So you do see this in a lot of these where The body is perfect and there's something. There's a top or a lip or a lug handle. And there seems to be evidence that maybe somebody went by with a some sort of a hand tool and finished it off, or was removing a feature that wasn't meant to be there.
When you say lug handle, it's got a hole in it. Was there something attached to that so it was easier to lift or hold or something?
The lug handles in many cases, were drilled out. So you'll see that,
Drilled out.
yeah, and so you see this drill. This is a drill
Yeah, that's a
hole.
beautiful, I mean, that's a perfect hole that's been cut. That's almost
It
like a,
looks like it on one side, but if you look at the other side, they don't align.
oh, okay.
They're almost always disjoint. They're not parallel or symmetrical to each other. Sometimes it looks like they came in from two different sides and didn't quite meet in a straight line.
Really?
Yes.
That's weird.
So yeah, I suspect that these holes were made much later by a different civilization. Same thing here. I think the holes were pretty much all added later. Maybe not all the time, but from what I've seen, it looks like the case.
Amazing.
Because we've seen a number with no holes as well.
So, with the analysis that you and your team has have been using, what are some of the takeaways that you have formulated?
I would say we don't know how these were made. We suspect that there's various methods, and some of them could be very simple. They could appear to be complex or modern, but maybe aren't. Here's a video of what's called centerless grinding. So you're basically setting up two rotating wheels, and you have the piece in the middle. And this can make a cylinder that's remarkably precise. A cylinder, though, right? It's going to be used for a very specific purpose. So that's based on some complex mathematics, as you see here. But you could also iterate this. You could figure this out by trial and error. It doesn't mean that you need to have advanced trigonometric capabilities to build a centerless grinding tool. It means that you just experiment by moving things in different configurations until you get something that works. And given enough time, you can. Here's another sort of bad drawing of mine showing how potentially the bottom of these vessels may have had kind of like a stalk or a piece left off it. So this bottom spindle and this functions like a spindle to hold the workpiece. And that could
Mhm.
have been rotated. And then at the end, once you're done grinding or whatever else, you snap that bottom piece off and then just finish off the base. So the bases on
Oh,
a lot of these don't seem very precise, and that could explain that. And then you see you would effectively remove that and end up with your finished product.
okay.
I think, it begs the question, like, and this is what gets archaeologists and traditional historians anxiety, gives them anxiety to talk about. What's a machine? These are machines from the 1800s. These are all foot and hand powered machines. There's a sewing machine, a pottery wheel, a lathe, and a saw, like
Yeah.
a table saw, all powered by humans. Are these machines? I think sure. So when we're talking about machines, I think these were machined. I think there were machines used in the construction or the manufacturing process of a lot of these, but they could have been powered by humans or
Hmm.
camels, right? And that means that there's still a human involved, and we do see a lot of imperfections. We see various levels of quality and sophistication. But this story is not told. This is really left out of the paradigm. Nobody suggests that they had these types of things back then. I'm suggesting that something at least this sophisticated must have been used. At least. We do not think, and I don't either, that the dynastic Egyptians had these. I certainly don't think Naqada or Badarian or those civilizations pre-dynastic had any of these things, which leaves the question, then who did and when? And where are the tools is another big question. So in all of Egyptian history, we found only 100 to 200 copper tools total. Saws and drills, we found 10 to 20. That's it, max. And these people were using copper for at least 2,000 years, and we found one or 200. So where are the tools if this was, like you said, pre-Diluvian 10,000 years ago? Well, long gone, repurposed, stolen, rotten, disintegrated, oxidized, whatever. We don't necessarily need to find tools to show that. The evidence of tool use is in the perfection. It's in the witness marks. It's
It's
in
in the
the
finished
perfect
product.
symmetry. Yes.
Yeah. If you were to pick an item that is from what you might think is the time period, or perhaps an item that is similar to a vase, to the stoneware, what would you choose in Egypt? Would you choose a temple that is very highly constructed? I mean, the pyramids by themselves are enigmatic because they're huge and each stone is minimum 2.5 tons. Egyptologists seem to think the dynastics built it. There's no way in hell that they touched it, that they dealt with it. It came with them. But with your work, what would you say is something that would be from a similar time period or a similar technology that you can identify?
I don't know if I necessarily would take one side or the other. I know the dynastic Egyptians were very capable. I think they were rehabbing a lot of these sites. They had the minister, like one of the pharaoh's brother, I forget the one. I'm terrible at my Egyptian's not good. But a pharaoh had a brother who he appointed a ministry of reconstruction and rehabilitation. His job was to go around and rehab ancient sites. Why would he need a person like that if they were making these things? They
Yeah,
they stumbled upon a lot of these and they tried to make them better.
yeah,
I don't know why. Is that because they were destroyed in a cataclysm by water, by flooding, by other humans? I don't know.
yeah,
But the Egyptians were rehabbing these sites actively. You can see it. That's not controversial, right? The controversy is, well, did they actually build them?
right.
They built some things. They built beautiful temples. They typically used much smaller stones. They used effectively bricks. Like if you look at the Washington Monument, that's not an obelisk. That's not a solid piece of granite. Those are bricks. Those are
Yeah,
blocks, construction blocks,
right.
right? We can't do that today. But their obelisks, whoever made the real obelisks, those are solid pieces of stone that are 100 plus feet tall sometimes. That's incredible, right? The pyramids have they have less impressive limestone blocks, but they also have giant granite that's made to unbelievable levels of flatness and precision. I'll show you one that's really incredible. So there's region of Egypt called the Fayum. It's south of Cairo, south of Giza. So it's not too far away. Sorry, I'm going through my library here. And here it is. So there's mud brick pyramids in this region. I think there's at least four of them or that are surviving. I don't know how many are
Oh, mud
original.
brick pyramids. Yeah, like in how.
But yes, exactly. So this is in the Fayum region. It's called a Lahun pyramid. So El Lahun or Sen. It's attributed to Sen Yusret the second, which is a pharaoh. I think they
Look at all
find
those mud bricks. I mean, it's
yeah.
ridiculous.
So this is a special type of mud. It still survives, even though it doesn't rain very much here, but it used to. And you
Yeah.
still see a lot of this. It gets very windy there, and occasionally when it does rain, you would expect probably more destruction than there has been. So it's a remarkable chemical composition. They're large. They're not small red bricks like we think of. They're much bigger. But look at what's underneath here. Megalithic limestone blocks seem to form the infrastructure. And I think that's the case with a lot of these. So they're not just simple mud bricks stacked up. There's a grand plan here. If they could build with megalithic limestone, and we see that all over the place, why do they use mud bricks? Well, it turns out that there was also casing stones, probably limestone, in some cases basalt or granite, on top of this. Petrie described some casing stones were still in place in some of these pyramids at the bottom. You could still see where the original casing stones were. So perhaps the mud brick was a design element, right? A feature, like an insulating layer, or it was purposeful for some reason. These weren't lazy people. They were like the most accomplished like race of humans probably ever. It seems like a crucial component. So what's really interesting to me about these pyramids is that they're not, at least from what I know, I don't know of any interior chambers. The chambers, if you want to call them burial chambers, whatever, the interesting parts are like below grade. They're below the base. They're underground, not really connected to the pyramid itself. And Petrie drew this. So this is, I think, in 1891. And this is where he says rock. So this is the pyramid. You can see the original casing stones, which were here covering the mud brick.
Yeah.
And then this is the base level. So you go a few hundred feet away down and then back sort of in towards the pyramid. And so all these underground shafts and chambers are entirely below grade. They're like not connected to the pyramid.
So is he
Uh,
suggesting that the mud bricks were initially designed as a feature of this pyramid?
I don't know what he said about that, but they were certainly designed. The pyramid was built using a megalithic limestone core
Yeah.
infrastructure. But I don't know what that looks like. And then mud brick around it. And in some cases in Hawara, in other cases, there's several layers. Like it might go like rock, mud brick, rock, etc. And then in this case, there was smooth casing stones, which I think were limestone.
Weird.
So I think in some of these bodies were found eventually. Again, all that to me, all that says is that dynastic Egyptians found these and put dead people inside them. I don't think
Yeah.
there's any evidence to suggest they made them.
Yeah.
So in this chamber here, it's a room made of granite. Okay, it looks like this. This room is
Oh,
granite. Petrie said that the walls here, and I touched the walls, they feel rough. These walls were ground to like extreme levels of flatness, but not polished. However, this big bathtub shaped box in the middle was. This was cut beautifully and then polished where, if it was silver, you'd see your reflection in it.
it
So
looks
this is
kind of
ex
like Serapeum size. Is it Serapeum size box or is it smaller?
no, much smaller than this. Well, yeah, the dimensions are less than half most of the Serapeum boxes. We don't know where
Okay.
the top is. The top was never found.
But there's no hieroglyphs on any of this.
Not on these. On some of them, there's boxes underneath the Black Pyramid that do have some inscriptions on them, but they're generally crude. Like if you go back to the Serapeum, the inscriptions on the side are really rough chiseled into the
Yeah,
side.
it's like later period. They're terrible
Yeah,
looking.
yeah, they don't look impressive. But this one, this was Petrie's favorite object. So you can see it's off cut right at the bottom. This side on the left is 32 inches or so, I think. And then on the other side, it's 36. So it's about 4 inch differential and then cut like that diagonally. And you can see it if you look at it against the back wall too, right? So this is off by 4 inches left to right. Why? Where's the top? These people were masters of perfection. Look at the rest of the box.
I was just going to ask you, is it because the floor is uneven?
No.
So the floor is perfectly square and level.
From what I can see, the floor is perfectly square and level. Petrie also he footnoted this really interesting fact in his paper. He said the entrance shaft that led in here, the way we got into this room, was narrower than the width of the box. So how did it get here? Effectively, what that means is that the room was built around the box.
Oh, wow. So maybe
So
the box contains some technology or something.
I don't know. So the lippage here is incredible. It's like 4,000th of an inch deviation from a perfect straight line. That's well beyond what's required in like modern countertop manufacturing.
Um,
This is much flatter than a countertop.
does Petrie attribute this to Old Kingdom?
Yeah, this is early dynastic,
Okay,
effectively.
so that's that. I mean,
Effectively.
right there.
He wasn't big into dating. I think he recognized it was tricky.
Okay, you recognize these.
Originally, he thought all this stuff was made by a precursor civilization, and then his peers kind of convinced him to get with the program, and he stopped sort of saying that.
Really? Did
But
he actually write about that? That there was a precursor pre-civilization? I don't remember that.
he called them, he thought they were aliens, they were invaders from Libya, and they founded Egypt. And that was his initial
Okay,
belief. So he calls this box, I love this quote. This is one of the greatest triumphs of accurate work in such a material that has ever been done.
that's saying a lot from him if he's impressed like that.
Yeah, he came back here a few times before he died.
How deep is that tomb or that sarcophagus underground? Is it under the surface or is it just in the guts of the pyramid?
It's not in the pyramid, right? So it's below grade. It's below the surface of the earth. It's below the base
Mhm.
of the pyramid. It's like 100 feet. I think you go down about 80 or 90 feet and then walk up a little bit. So it's not very far. It's a dozen or 20 meters, but it's not connected to the pyramid. You don't go inside the pyramid. It's underground. So was the pyramid built on top of this thing? Or was this thing built later? We don't know. To put that in context, this is that box again. So the flatness deviation is across the 1.27 meters. That's the side, the narrower side.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's 4,000th of an inch. To put in perspective, a modern granite countertop is basically never made flatter across a similar span than 60 thousandths or 600ths. So this is over an order of magnitude. It's more than 10 times more precise than a granite countertop is made today with diamond tip circular saws and fine polishing. Now, this is possible. You actually can achieve very high levels of flatness or lippage with hand polishing techniques. That's well known. There's ways of getting it down this flat. However, how do you know? How would you know it's this flat? You can't see this. This level of deviations, you can't touch this or see this. You would have no idea if you're achieving this. And they're maintaining this across the whole way. So they have to have some way of measuring, some way of analyzing it, some metrology effectively.
Is there any kind of gassing or discharge on the walls of that chamber that sarcophagus is laying in? I mean, that's one of the things that Chris Dunn's always harped on is that there is gassing of hydrogen extracts and things like that on the walls. Is there anything like that?
I don't know. I did not really, I wasn't really looking at that when we were here or
So you
even
actually got that's
considering
actually
it.
you taking photograph.
Yeah, we were there. We were there. So all the
Wow.
members of the Artifact Foundation. So we had Kyle Allen, Ben Van Kirkuk was here,
Okay.
Yusuf Awiyan, and me and Carolee Polka. We're all here back in 2024.
Wow. Very impressive. It's almost like it's a container for something. Like it's
Yeah.
housing. It's a housing. It houses something. You know what I mean?
It does. Yeah, it does. I know what you mean. Why do you need to top that flat? Well, maybe if you wanted to seal it, right? If you wanted the container sealed, potentially. They never found a top. The Serapeum boxes are also very similar. The tops are remarkably flat, and you would get a pretty tight. You would get almost an airtight seal. I don't know if it would be perfect, but who knows? Could have been. It could have been. People have theorized that there was chemicals in there. They were growing crystals. I've heard
Yeah.
many of these things have extraordinary resonance properties, and they're not all. They don't all look like perfectly symmetrical like rectangular boxes. Not all the time. You'll see some edges where there's a really wide radius in the corner, and other times it's very tight and maintained across a few meters. So it's inexplicable. You don't
Yeah.
always see extreme levels of precision. Not always, but
Mhm.
sometimes you do, and you can. And so it's like, well, why did they sometimes employ extreme levels of manufacturing acumen and other times not?
Do you think that the technology that cut, shaped, and smoothed these surfaces is beyond us right now? Or in your analysis, do you think that it's something that's close to what we can achieve, perhaps lasers or some kind of arc welding and or torching, or I don't know how the hell to call it, that exists, but is used in a different or sophisticated way?
Well, we don't really work in stone like this today. The exception would be in inspection plates that are this flat and even more flat. They're used in metrology labs and they're made of granite because granite's less it's more tolerant to heat and changes in heat and humidity and things like that.
Hmm.
I think we do have the capability of making this stuff. We probably can. The question is how. So would we use carbide drill tips? Would we use grinding techniques? I don't know. And I haven't seen anyone replicate these today using modern technology,
Right.
partially because it's expensive. You would break your tools, there'd be wear and tear on your equipment. It's cost prohibitive, right? So we haven't seen anyone do it. There's no evidence that hand tools could make this. A few people have tried, but the results don't come close to what we've seen and analyzed. So, there's a big question. Most likely there's some culture had advanced knowledge that we're unaware of.
Well, that was my next question to you is that it's beginning to appear that there's an advanced science behind this that we either have not evolved to, or it's under our nose and we're just not paying attention. And it's like
Yeah.
we don't cut stone in the way that they did. But whatever the hell they were using, it's very it's a powerful tool. And it has an elegance to it as well. When we see these stoneware.
It does. Yeah, it really, some of them are quite striking in the proportions. And some of the sides will follow like a quadratic equation effectively, or it's advanced spherical geometry. We don't really do that today with the exception of marble. So we will use marble because marble is very smart. Marble is much softer than these stones. These are all igneous granites, diorites, porphyry type stones, breccia. They're very hard. Marble's not. And so when an artist wants to make a statue of David or something, they typically always use marble.
Yeah.
I haven't seen anything like this at all in granite. Not at all. We've seen cylindrical shapes though. I've seen toothbrush holders made out of what looks like granite that are very round. But again, it's not that hard. What's hard is the complex spherical geometry. And the interior is being hollowed out. I have not seen that done at all. Not
Yeah.
once.
Yeah. We haven't even talked about statuary. There's a statue in the Cairo Museum of Khafre that's made of diorite or something else. And Muhammad is of the belief that it's 100% manufactured. And as I've been looking at it, I actually wrote an article on it. It is one of the most beautiful sculptures I've ever seen. And I think that Ramses II put his cartouche on the base of it in a very scratchy, kind of crappy, I was
Yeah,
here kind of graffiti look.
yeah.
Have you analyzed any of the, stone sculptures that we have left to us that are identified by our Egyptologists as left by known pharaohs?
No, not yet. Chris Dunn has been a little bit more focused on that over his career. He's famously looked at the Ramses statue
Yeah,
a couple of times I think at Karnak. I don't know how precise those are. But again, like when you're saying machined, or I guess when he said manufactured, when Muhammad said manufactured, he meant machined, right?
yeah,
So, a person holding a grinder or a circular saw or somebody using a miter saw or somebody using a lathe, like I would say that's all machining. But it doesn't mean that there's no human involved. You could have an artist that's using a grinder. But I do strongly suspect there was whoever was making these things, including probably many or some of the statues, was using rotating power tools of some sort, of a rotating nature, because you can see circular saw marks in
yeah,
objects throughout all of these museums. And they're circular because the center point is, you can see you can see the radius of whatever wheel it was based on the length of the cut.
yeah.
So something revolving, something rotating. I don't know what the power was. I don't know what the tools are made out of, and I don't know where they are.
It's really a challenge when you're dealing with sophisticated technology and the science behind it, trying to identify it when perhaps we're not even up to speed on it. We haven't evolved to that level of science, So we're kind of like
Hmm.
walking in the dark and admiring these artifacts and going, "What the hell? Who did these?" It's kind of fun. And then, of course, the big problem is we have a social science of Egyptological inquiry that shuts the door on anything that is questionable like this and relegates it to the dynastic period, which just does not make any sense anymore. So, as we close, Adam, what's your feeling on continual analytical study of these artifacts? Do we have to come up to speed, or is someone going to make a breakthrough? What's your gut on this?
Well, we have plans. We have additional projects that we've been working on for years, and eventually it's a combination of a larger data set, partnerships with more institutions. We have a few universities that are interested and starting to take interest now, so hopefully that continues, and more publications before I think eventually people, I hope, will recognize that you can't make this stuff with primitive hand tools. That's number one. That opens up a Pandora's box of questions, right? And
Yeah,
for career archaeologists and academics, those questions can be existential. Like, okay, well, if these were made with machine tools and we're very, very confident the dynastic Egyptians didn't have them, and ergo that the civilization right before them that was primitive must not have either, then there was an ancient society that was advanced that's gone. And so then you have the questions of like, the Atlantean type topics. I'm sure they had a different name for themselves, but there's
yeah.
there's a lot of possibilities. Why were people so focused on Egypt? Why there, of all places? There's probably an explanation because you really don't see the same stuff in many other parts of the world. South America is very interesting, but it's very different levels of construction. You don't see as many megalithic sites. We don't find objects that are made to such high precision. Although I have seen things in South America and in Asia as well, plates and other objects that seem to be extremely, extremely precise.
Hmm.
So this level of technology was known. It was in other parts of the world, but really not to such a high concentration and impressiveness as you see in Egypt.
Amazing. Hey, I want to thank you for joining us. You've given us some good material to think about. I These are definitely out of place artifacts, and there's no other way to explain them. We're not
Yeah.
getting much help from the Egyptological community, are we? They're not into this at all. And
I I give them some time. The younger generation is they're coming around a little bit. The older crowd maybe not, but we have some pretty good relationships with some of them. So
oh,
it's a question of
cool.
time. I think it's a question of time.
From Egypt or from American universities?
Egypt, Europe, North America.
Excellent. Excellent. Fantastic. Hey, if we could get a few photographs for our Facebook page, it would be great. I want to thank you. Adam, I definitely see a book in this somewhere, buddy. I know you're busy as hell. You got kids
We
and you got a family and but you got to spit something out one of these days because you got a lot of data and I think someone would love to publish it so we can get the word out.
we do our best to put. Well, I wouldn't say we do our best. We have been publicizing data on our website, and we will continue to do that. Sometimes we're just not able to immediately
Yeah.
for various reasons. We haven't finished the analytics, we haven't vetted it, or our partner doesn't want it released yet. So you can check out our website. It's just artifactfoundation.org. Check out some of the other members of the foundation. So Karoly Polka, Ancient Technology Podcast, Chris King, who's a precision manufacturing expert. He machines to like aerospace levels of tolerances. Ahmed Adli is another member. He has a YouTube channel devoted to the Arab speaking world to communicate a lot of
Oh,
this
cool.
information to them. Of
Yeah.
course, Ben Van Kerkwyk,
Yeah.
Tremor X, and then Kyle and Russ Allen were Brothers of the Serpent podcast. There's a lot of us that are interested in this subject, and hopefully we can continue to push it forward.
Are you on, I guess you're all over YouTube, but you guys don't have a channel specific to your work, do you?
No, the foundation is really just it's a nonprofit just devoted to the exploration and
Okay.
evidence-based work, but many of our members do.
Very cool. Very cool. Hey, I really appreciate your time, Adam. Thank you. And let's hopefully there's going to be a breakthrough one of these days where you can say, hey, we know what it is. It's a special laser because we developed it. And now that's what they were using. It's
Right.
really,
Yeah.
it's a challenge.
One day, one day. But thanks for having me on, Cliff. It's been a pleasure and it's been too long.
Yeah. Thanks, man. We'll have you back.
All right. Cheers.